a lawyer. I was a trial attorney. Been practicing law about 3 years. I was a liberal, Democrat. I was the ACLU rep in Laredo. I was on the board of trustees for the local legal aid society, which provided free legal assistance to the poor. And most important, I knew I was living in a free country. There's no doubt in my mind that I was a free person. I mean, I'd gone to public school from the first grade. I'd done the Pledge of Allegiance like most people do, with liberty for all in America. There's no doubt in my mind I was living the life of a free individual. And I walked over to the political science section of the library, and I saw 4 different little colored books there, different colors. They were called Essays on Liberty, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I went down and I reached for volume 1 and I started perusing it. And I was absolutely stunned at what I was reading. I started reading each essay right there in the library. And then I took them home, all 4 volumes, I took them home, pored over them, read them and reread them. And it was truly a road to Damascus experience. It changed the course of my life. I had discovered libertarianism. And so when the organizers of PorcFest asked me to come and said, Jacob, share some lessons you've learned about libertarianism with PorcFest this year, I said, it'd be an honor. Because I have learned some lessons. I'm not sure how much wiser. They say, with age comes wisdom, and I'm not sure I'm there yet, but I'm trying. But one of the lessons I learned right off the bat was respect to methodology of advancing liberty. You see, what was different about these essays is that they were hardcore, pure, no compromise, unadulterated libertarianism. Radical libertarianism. And the reason that's important is because if I had been hit with the watered-down, compromising, reform-oriented, conservative-leaning libertarianism that now predominates in the libertarian movement and the Libertarian Party, I don't think I would have discovered that I was a libertarian. Because I needed that hardcore, pure libertarianism to shatter, to break through the inches of this wall that encased my mind, this wall of indoctrination, that I lived the life of a free person. And as I'm reading these essays, I'm realizing that's a lie. I've been lied to from the first grade. That I don't live the life of a free person, not in terms of the welfare state way of life we live, and later I learned the warfare state way of life we live. That it took that power of that pure libertarian case to break through, to shatter this inches thick indoctrination that encased my mind. Now, I happen to be one of these libertarians that believe that we still have a chance to achieve a free society. And when I was reading these essays and I was realizing I'm not free, I remember back when I was 28, I said, I want to live the life of a free human being before I pass from this earth, even if it's just one day. And I'm not naive. I know what the odds are. Every day for the last 40 years, things have gotten worse as far as freedom. We all know that. That no matter how active this party's been, no matter how active the Libertarian Party's been or this movement, doesn't matter. Every year, things have gotten worse. And so I'm not naive in terms of the odds. But you never know what tomorrow can bring. And things can shift on a dime. This is a movement that's been working for decades, 7 or 8, 9 decades. And I remember back then, older people would say, oh, the future of libertarianism lies with you young people. And I look back on it now, and it's just a cop-out, because now people my age are saying the same thing. Oh, Jacob, we don't have a chance. We got to invest in the young people. This is nonsense. Now, I know that there's libertarians, plenty of libertarians that died without knowing what it's like to live the life of a free person. But I figure I'm going to keep trying. And so what does that mean? What does that mean to achieve freedom? Now, why are you here at PorcFest? I mean, sure, it's a beautiful setting, a lot of nice people, fellow libertarians. But in a larger sense, why are you a libertarian? What is it you want out of your life? Well, I know what I want out of my life. I want to know what it's like to live the life of a free human being. And I may not succeed in that. I may pass before I experience that, but I will go down to the very end saying, I'm fighting to live in a genuinely free society. Now, what does that mean? Well, in order to achieve freedom, I believe that you need a critical mass of people that understand what freedom means, that are committed to it, and that are passionate about achieving it, and that believe that it's achievable. And I don't know what that critical mass is, but I believe it's significantly less than a majority. If you look at the great movements in history for liberty, they're always led by an infinitesimally small minority of people. But they're committed, they're passionate, they want to be free. Well, but they have to understand what freedom is. Now, what is freedom? Well, freedom is the absence of infringements on freedom. You know, we need to identify what it is that's preventing us from being free. And it's the state that's preventing us from being free by putting infringements on us. So if we count up these infringements, let's say there's 100. The drug war, the welfare state, the CIA, conscription, gun control, on and on. Let's say there's 100 of them. In order to achieve freedom, you've got to identify them and you've got to remove them. Because if all you do is reform these infringements, you've accomplished nothing. I mean, all you're doing with reform is keeping the infringement intact. Now, you may make it better, you may make it more palatable, but you're not achieving freedom. Yeah, see, that's my dog over there cheering. So you need to identify what these infringements are in terms of getting rid of them. And if all you do is reform them, let me give you an example, like slavery. Let's assume that we're all magically transported back to 1855 Alabama. And there's no doubt that the reform element of the libertarian movement and the Libertarian Party would say, Jacob, freedom is here to stay. It's in the Constitution. It's a permanent part of American life. If we're going to be taken seriously, we need to accept that. We're not going to change that. And so we're going to reform slavery so they get laws enacted, banishing lashings and better food and better working conditions and shorter hours, all of which the slaves would love because it's improving their plight. But you see, there's a big problem with it. It's not freedom. In order to achieve freedom, you've got to remove the infringement. You've got to dismantle the structure of slavery. And it works the same way with the serfdom under which we live. And that's really what it is. It's a serfdom. It's a variation of slavery. Welfare state serfdom, warfare state serfdom. We exist for the sake of the state. That is, we exist to serve the state. That's what we do in life. We work in order to provide the money so that the state can do all the things. Welfare, warfare, and so forth. So that's one of the big lessons here. We're trying to reach a critical mass, but it's got to be done with the right ideas, the right message. Because if all we do is reform it, we've achieved nothing. Now, as Scott mentioned, I sought the Libertarian Party presidential nomination in 2020. And I want to share with you some of my experiences there because they provide a way to look at what's happened to this movement and the Libertarian Party as well. I announced around the 1st of November in 2019 at the South Carolina Libertarian Party Convention. Now, they were having a debate there, a presidential debate, but I didn't qualify for that debate because I didn't get there. I hadn't announced in time. But I went to the debate because I was curious what the 8 or 9 people on the stage were going to say. The moderator of the panel was Matt Welch of Reason Magazine. Reason Magazine is the premier libertarian magazine in the libertarian movement. And Welch has sort of a crossover role. He's with Reason, which is a nonprofit educational foundation. But he also is very active in the Libertarian Party, especially as a commentator. Well, he was serving as the moderator. And so he comes to me, the first question out of the chute there is he asked all the panelists, and every one of them gave their answer, and all of them gave some sort of variation on reform. Health savings accounts, some reform variation, but none of them said abolish it immediately. Well, I thought this was interesting, and so I went back home, I went to my campaign website, and I immediately published an article saying, I want everybody to know where I stand in this race. If I'd been up on that stage, I would have said abolish it immediately. Well, immediately, Welch goes on the attack in Reason magazine, which didn't surprise me. He says, what Jacob's trying to do is he's just trying to show he's more libertarian, that he's more hardcore than these other candidates. But that was not my intent. That's what the reform crowd has said about us, those of us advocating liberty in a principle sense, for 30 years. That is not my intent. In fact, it's a silly attack, because how would you measure it anyway? Suppose you've got a leftist that says, I oppose the drug war, but he's 20% libertarian. And then you've got a conservative that says, I support the drug war, and he's 80% libertarian. Who's more libertarian? Who's more hardcore? You can't compare the two. It's like apples and oranges. What Matt Welch and Reason and the reform crowd have never been able to understand is it's about freedom. That if you want freedom, you've got to get rid of the infringements on freedom. And one of the massive infringements on freedom is Medicare. Or, to a larger extent, government involvement in health care. That if you want a free society, you have to separate health care and the state. And so I said that in my article. I made the case for freedom, and then the utilitarian case that it's Medicare and Medicaid that destroyed the finest healthcare system in history. That's the cause of the soaring healthcare prices. That's the cause of the healthcare crisis. That if you want to get rid of that crisis, there's only one way to do it. Get rid of Medicare and Medicaid, or get rid of all government involvement in healthcare. Well, okay, so I wasn't surprised that Reason had done this. Reason had attacked me before. I once was talking about the 19th century, about what was achievable, because I'm often, one of the other critiques I get is, Jacob, you're advocating utopia. You're just utopian. Well, that's ridiculous. Utopia is something that can't be achieved. And so I point to 19th century America, like 1885, and I said, here's a society that has no income tax, no IRS, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Federal Reserve, drug war, immigration controls, CIA, NSA, Pentagon, military-industrial complex, gun control, on and on and on. They achieved those things. So it's not utopia, it's achievable. Well, so Reason and the Cato Institute, same thing, would go on this joint attack against me and said, well, he didn't condemn slavery in his article. And their argument was that if you write about the 19th century, if you don't condemn slavery, people are going to think libertarians favor slavery. It was ludicrous. And then later, Cato issues another attack against me, saying, oh, he's just saying the 19th century was a libertarian panacea. I never say it's a libertarian panacea. There was slavery, women didn't have the right to vote. What I'm saying is, this is achievable. No income tax, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the whole shooting match, Federal Reserve, this is achievable. You see, what's happened with the reform crowd is they've given up. They've just given up. And so they've settled for reform. They say this is inevitable, it's a permanent part. It's like what they would have said in 1855 Alabama. That, Jacob, you're just arguing for something that's not achievable, and this is nonsense. So right after my article on Medicare, I get a call from a supporter that says, what have you done? This is in the Libertarian Party. What have you done? What are you talking about? You've lost the race right now. You've got to remove that article right now. You can't win this nomination if you're calling for the repeal of Medicare. I said, hey man, this is the Libertarian Party, right? This is the party of principle. No, you can't win this thing. Your goose is cut. And then soon after that, there's an article where a woman attacks me for favoring open borders, which is the libertarian position, the legitimate libertarian position. But she's a conservative-oriented libertarian. which now dominates in the movement and in the party, the conservative-leaning libertarians, the reform-oriented libertarians. And so the argument is, oh, well, in the libertarian movement, there's two different positions on immigration that people can take, and they're both libertarian, which is ludicrous. I mean, libertarianism is an internally consistent philosophy. It does not embrace contradictions. If you find yourself embracing contradictions, as Ayn Rand would say, you need to check your premises. So how do you determine which is the right position? Well, you compare it to the non-aggression principle. When I crossed into New Hampshire, I crossed the border. It was entirely a peaceful act. I didn't initiate force against anyone. That's how you know open borders are consistent with the non-aggression principle. But if you tried to stop me, or if the state tried to stop me, that's initiating force against me. So, but you see, now the predominant sentiment in the Libertarian Party is, oh, you can choose either one. And so actually the dominant sentiment is immigration controls, which are a direct violation of the Libertarian non-aggression principle. The argument is, oh, Jacob, I'm pro-immigration. I'm pro-immigration. My grandmother came here, from Holland or whatever, and I love immigrants, and I want the government to let in more. But you see, that's not freedom. That's reform. Because freedom is the free movements of goods and services across borders peacefully. So, in any event, a few weeks later, I'm at another convention. This time they're having a presidential debate again, and I'm participating in this one. And there's a speaker right before the debate that's going to talk about healthcare freedom. And he wants to train Libertarian Party candidates on making the case for healthcare freedom. And I thought, well, this is intriguing. And so he gets up, and this guy's a libertarian expert on healthcare. And there's no question this guy had the credentials. Libertarian. So he gets up, and his first sentence is, we all know what the libertarian position on healthcare is. It's a separation of healthcare and the state. And I'm thinking, wow, I am in a perfect position here, because that's exactly the case I'm going to make in this debate. I'm going to take all these other candidates to task for favoring reform. And then comes the but. And then he says, but we all know, he says, people aren't ready for that. And so we've got to be practical. And we have to advocate health savings accounts. And so he says, I'm going to teach you how to make the case for health savings accounts. And he spends the next 55 minutes teaching Libertarian Party candidates how to make the case for health savings accounts. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, he had an hour to show people how to make the case for separating healthcare in the state. And he didn't do that. He settles for reform. And it's compromise. And it's you see it in this pandemic thing. For 1 year, we've heard people say, oh, Jacob, the lockdowns. Oh, Fauci shouldn't have done the lockdowns, and the governor shouldn't have done the lockdowns. And if, man, we need a libertarian up there running the show here at the Centers for Disease Control. And, man, the mask mandates, God, they're destroying our freedom, and on and on. But you see, it's all reform. How often did you see any critic saying we need to abolish the Centers for Disease Control, we need to abolish the FDA, we need to get government out of healthcare? That's the freedom argument. Instead, for a year or year and a half, we've really just heard the case for reform where we passed up an excellent opportunity to make the case to the American people for what freedom really is. It's getting government out of healthcare, just like our ancestors got government out of religion. Now, let me digress here a minute and tell you how I got involved in the party, Libertarian Party. I just started the Future of Freedom Foundation in 1989 with this idea of presenting a principled, hardcore message on liberty. And I figured that what I would do is just put it out in the marketplace. I've gotten to the point in my life where I don't think you can convince people to become libertarians. And I know that people would get upset sometimes when they hear that, because they have these training sessions about how can we construct our phrases so we can convince more people to become libertarians. I don't bother with that anymore. You cannot convince people to become libertarians. I've got family members. I've got close friends that I've talked to about libertarianism. They understand it, and they want no part of it. And I figured if I can't convince people who care about me, that like me. What chance do I have to convince people that I don't even know? And so this idea of convincing people to be libertarians is a fool's errand. So how do we reach this critical mass? Well, we do it by finding libertarians. Not making libertarians, but finding them. You know, like finding me before I went to that public library. But that doesn't mean buttonholing people. It means standing fast for these principles and putting them in the marketplace to be discovered. Through conversations with people, or through an op-ed, or through a letter to the editor, or even conversations with family members. But standing fast for the principle without knowing what the result's going to be. Because I guarantee you, when they published those little 4 volumes that I discovered in Laredo, back in the 50s, and they were asked, how do you measure your success? They could not have said 20 years from now, they're going to be discovered by a young lawyer in Laredo, Texas in a public library, and they're going to change the course of his life. But the important thing is the principle. So I formed FFF with that idea in mind. And we've survived. It's been tough. We're a small foundation, but we found donors, or donors found us actually. We really don't do very much active 30 years, but people that like our work and they believe in our work have funded us. So we've gotten to go, we're 31 years now, we're there, and we have tough years. But that's okay, because we've adhered strictly to principle. And if people need a repository of sound principled libertarianism, they can go to FFF.org. Well, I get a phone call several months after I founded FFF from a guy named Bill Evers. Now, Evers is a California activist, LP, and he says, Jacob, I want you to be on the platform committee of the Libertarian Party. Well, I didn't know much about the party. I knew that it existed, but most of my activity, 99%, had been involved in educational work, think tanks, foundations, and so forth. I left the law practice to go work for the Foundation for Economic Education. Some of you are familiar with that in New York. They published a magazine called The Freeman. They were the ones who had published these 4 little volumes. I ended up going to work for them. And so I said to Bill, I said, no, thank you. And he says, why not? And I said, because you're a political party. You're out there getting votes. You've got to compromise the principles. You've got to water them down to get a broader base of votes. That doesn't interest me. I don't think that's going to achieve freedom. To achieve freedom, we need this solid message. And he says, well, have you ever read the platform of the Libertarian Party? And I said, no, I don't need to read the platform. I already know what it says. It's a watered-down thing where candidates are out there broadening their base of support. You know, as we often hear, the Libertarian Party is not a debating society, Jacob. It's a political party. Our job is to get people elected to public office, and therefore, the platform is going to reflect that. And I said that to Evers. He says, have you ever read the platform? And I said, no, you know. He says, if I send you a copy of the platform, would you read it? I said, send it on. So a few days later, I opened up my mail and started reading this thing. And I am absolutely stunned. Flabbergasted. This is a pure libertarian manifesto. I mean, it could have been written, maybe it was written by Murray Rothbard. I mean, it was just incredible, solid, no compromise. Abolish Social Security, abolish Medicare, abolish the CIA, abolish this and abolish that. We challenge the cult of the omnipotent state. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. I called Evers back up and I said, if you'll still take me, it would be an honor to serve on the platform committee of this party. And I didn't know how many votes their presidential candidate had gotten in the previous election or in any election. I didn't know how many members they had. I didn't care. I didn't know how much money they were raising. None of that mattered to me. I didn't ask. All that mattered to me was this was a special party. This is a party that adheres to principle. And in fact, they labeled themselves at some point along the way the party of principle. And so I joined the platform committee. I served 3 terms. It was very gratifying. But from the very beginning, I noticed what was happening. That Republicans, conservatives were coming into the party and into the movement. Same thing was happening in the movement. And they were bringing their baggage with them. Their positions on regulated controlled borders. And their defeatist attitude of you gotta accept that Social Security and Medicare Medicaid, the welfare state are here, that the CIA and the NSA are here, and you've got to settle for reform. And so they were telling us, you need to get rid of these radical planks in the platform, like abolish the CIA, which they ultimately did. They ultimately prevailed, and they gutted it. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the fact that the CIA was infiltrating organizations in the 60s and 70s. Well, they didn't need to infiltrate the LP because the right-wing members of the LP did it for them. I mean, there was one party that called for the abolition of this evil agency. It's really the most evil agency in U.S. history, one of the most evil in the world history. And now that plank is gutted. And I would venture to say that if you did a survey of Libertarian Party members and members of the Libertarian movement and said, do you favor the abolition of the CIA, I venture to say that the vast majority would say, of course not. We need them for national security. Well, Evers in my position, the argument was our candidates are not winning because the press is discovering what our positions are. We need to get rid of these planks, you see, conceal this stuff. And we need to water down the planks, gradually get rid of Social Security. Oh, it should be so heartless to get rid of it. People would be dying in the streets if you got rid of Medicare overnight, you see. You've got to gradually get rid of it. Now, notice something important here, that the libertarian non-aggression principle is our core principle, right? That says that we will not support the initiation of force. Well, and when you join the party, they actually make you sign a pledge that says, I pledge not to support the initiation of force. But it's become a joke. It's become a great big lie because everybody knows that when they sign that pledge, they immediately are going to go out and support the CIA or Social Security phase out over the next 40 years, or health savings account, or school vouchers, or some other kind of regulatory reform, NSA reform, all of which keep the initiation of force intact, including during the period of time of the gradual phase-out. So Evers in my position was, are you kidding me? The platform is our protection. This is our insurance policy against the candidates that are going out there, polluting our brand by telling people that we stand for these things that we don't stand for. And the ultimate of this, is that in the 2020 election, the campaign, I was perusing websites for some reason, and I came across a website of a woman who was running for State House on the Libertarian Party ticket. She says there on her website, I'm a Libertarian Party candidate for State House. I can't remember if it was Senate or House. She says, I'm a pragmatist, which means she's a practical person. I believe in public schooling. I'm like, oh my God, I'm stunned. Not vouchers, okay, which is a reform, in favor of this massive socialist program that is the root cause of the indoctrination into where we are as a country, where everybody thinks they're free under this way of life. And she's there up front with no pushback. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is the culmination of it. I'm a libertarian candidate running for office favoring this massive socialist system. And with no pushback. As many of you know, the Libertarian Party has become pretty much a revolving door for Republican candidates. They come into the party, they go back out, they come in, they go back out, and they feel very comfortable in the Libertarian Party. And rightfully so, because the Libertarian brand is now mush. It's just mush. It's a conservative Libertarian mush, a hash. And that's why if you go out and you ask people, the general public, if they know what libertarians stand for, if they even do, they'll say, oh yeah, it's right wing. It's a subset of conservatism. And they're right. I mean, you've got, in the movement, you've got the mainstream press describing libertarian think tanks as conservative-oriented, conservative-leaning. When Bill Weld was being groomed, Bill Weld was the Republican governor or senator, one state up here. Massachusetts, okay, big wig Republican, Then he comes in the Libertarian Party in this revolving door. And he was being groomed to be the Libertarian presidential candidate in 2020. I always figured I'd be running against him for the nomination. And the reform element of the crowd loved him because he displayed what the movement, the party stand for now, this mush. this combination, conservatism, republicanism, libertarianism. He was the epitome of that. He was their fair-haired boy. Well, the conservative columnist for the Washington Post is a guy named George Will. And George Will writes an op-ed. Now Will is Mr. Conservative. Will would never call himself a libertarian. Will writes a column in the Washington Post, "Can this man save conservatism?" And he's essentially endorsing Will. And he's saying, Will, by becoming the Libertarian Party presidential candidate, can be the savior of conservatism. I mean, this was the ultimate. And with no pushback. I don't know anybody in the Libertarian Party hierarchy that pushed back. I mean, if Will were ever to write a column like that about me, I would sue for libel. Okay? I mean, to me this was incredible. But he's right, you see, because it's become mush. The libertarian brand is no brand. And when I get fundraising letters where it says, help me, send me money so I can get my message out from LP candidates, I'm thinking, get your message out. This party's been in existence 50 years. After 50 years, everybody should know what libertarians stand for. But they don't. Because libertarianism today is a mush, a hash. There is no brand. They've destroyed our brand. Our brand, what was in that 1990 platform. Now let me tell you, because that platform was gutted. Now let me tell you how this came about. You go back to the 1930s, the Franklin Roosevelt administration. And that's when all the things I talked about in the 1800s, you know, no Social Security, no income tax, that's where everything changed. That's the watershed, the New Deal. That's where the crown jewel of the system, Social Security, came into existence. And conservatives were pretty principled. They were battling this thing, saying this is a socialist program, which it was. Social Security originated among German socialists. It was imported into the United States. And this goes on up to the 50s and early 60s, where the conservatives were pretty good on this issue. And the culmination of this was Barry Goldwater, where Goldwater publishes his book, Conscience of a Conservative, where he attacks the welfare state. And it's pretty solid, but he gets massacred in the 64 election. Johnson just smashes him. I think Goldwater took 1 or 2 states. Well, now the Republicans and the conservative movement are faced with a big decision. Do they keep on attacking this system, which looks like it's going to be permanent, or do they throw in the towel? Well, they threw in the towel. They said, if we're going to be players, we're going to get our op-eds published, if we're going to be taken seriously by the mainstream press, if we're going to get our candidates elected in office, we have to accept the inevitability of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the welfare state. By this time, they had already accepted the warfare state, the CIA, the NSA, etc. They threw in the towel. That provided a void that the Libertarian Party enters. So when David Nolan has this meeting in his living room in Colorado in 1971, they're saying there's a void here. We need a party that's going to call for genuine liberty, not free market reforms and free market this, free market that. They're going to call for genuine liberty. That's radical. That was the libertarian brand. That's the brand that's been destroyed. So today, I mean, how many candidates, Libertarian Party candidates, how many people in the Libertarian movement, in the educational foundations and think tanks, call for the immediate repeal of Social Security? You won't find it. I challenge you, except for me, to find any candidate ran for president last time around that called for the immediate repeal of Social Security. They're terrified of it. Every candidate. And my prediction is in this next come around, 2024, they're still going to be terrified. Terrified to call for the repeal of this socialist program. And instead call for some kind of reform, gradualism, whatever. Third rail, Jacob, third rail. Same with Medicare and Medicaid. There's terror in this movement, in this party, to call for liberty. And I'm saying that if you want freedom, and if there's any lesson that I impart to you in this talk, this is it. Is you need to go back home. Everybody needs to go back home from PorcFest. And you need to ask yourself a real important question. Do you want to be free or not? Do you want to live the life of a free human being or not? And do you want it in your lifetime? Do you want it from 40 years from now, or do you want it now? Because if you want it now, reform isn't going to get it for you. that only the principal case for liberty is going to get it. And if you believe there's a chance of getting it, then it's necessary to stand for that principle of liberty rather than reform. And I'm here out of self-interest. I told you before, I want to be free. And I got to find people. I'm looking for libertarians. I'm not looking for reformers. I'm looking in this audience for people to join up with us. 6 minutes left. 15 minutes left. Good. I'm looking for the people that want liberty to reach this critical mass. Because if this catalyst comes, that nobody can foresee when a catalyst can come, you got to be ready for it. You got to have that critical mass in place. And the biggest disaster would be to give up and then have the catalyst take place and not be ready for it. Not have that critical mass ready to erupt to the surface. We have to operate on the assumption that freedom is achievable, that it's not utopian. Look, we all know things are bad. You got $28 trillion in debt this government has incurred and climbing. This cannot end well. There's a $3 trillion deficit, which means another $3 trillion onto that debt, $31 trillion. That's $250,000 per taxpayer. You put that on your balance sheet? You think about that at night, that you owe $250,000 as your share of this debt? How do you think they're going to collect this debt if they need to? They think they can spend themselves into prosperity? Are you kidding me? Try it. Try your own family. Try spending your family into prosperity, incurring credit card debt out the kazoo. You will spend yourself into bankruptcy, and that's what's going to happen here. It's not a matter of when. I mean, it's just a matter of when, not whether. And when that day comes, you better be prepared for some real tyranny. We've seen the tyranny with respect to the military and the CIA, with the crackdowns, the spying, the surveillance, the assassinations, the Patriot Act. We've seen all that with the war on terrorism, that they're now turning inward. But none of us have really seen the crackdown that comes with an economic crisis or a monetary crisis. But you will. Where they don't seize gold, like Roosevelt in the 30s, where they seize IRAs and retirement accounts and replace them with government bonds. They're destroying our liberty. They're destroying our country. They have destroyed our liberty. And they're destroying our country. And there's one hope in all this. There's just one light in all this darkness. If there wasn't a way out of this, I'd be here passing out cyanide capsules instead of our booklet at the Future of Freedom Foundation. The hope is you. Every libertarian, this movement is the hope for America. And really the hope for the world. Nobody can pull out of this morass. It's worldwide. It's status morass. The Americans are the only one that can lead the world out of this. And when I say Americans, it's the libertarian movement. You are the only ones that can do this. You are the hope for mankind. And hopefully you can do it before the disaster strikes. But if the disaster does strike, the country's going to need leaders to pull us out of that disaster. And that's you. And so you have to do some soul searching here. Do you want to resign yourself to reform? Is that what you want out of your life? You want to get to your deathbed and say, man, I reformed the IRS. All right, man, I got some more deductions in. Or do you want to get to your deathbed and say, man, I experienced what it was like to live the life of a free human being. If we stick to principle in this movement, I have no doubts that we can lead this country and the world to freedom, peace, prosperity, and harmony. Thank you very much.